Really, really fascinating report. And what struck me was just how difficult it is across Europe to manage this problem. Can you explain a bit more about what you found?
Absolutely. I think the problem the report identifies is that both the legal and illegal immigration we have enormous difficulties with, and the two actually have to be taken together because they sort of bleed into each other. On the illegal immigration side, the ECHR case law is developed in a quite extraordinary way. I don't think anybody looking back at the original ECHR would argue about the things that we shouldn't be torturing, extrajudicial killings, privacy and family life. The problem has been, since the 1970s, this idea of a living instrument has meant that essentially the Strasbourg judges have been making up cases as they go along. Yeah. And we're getting to a position where it's really extremely difficult to remove anybody. There are some extraordinary cases that we cite. The man who murdered someone in the back of an ambulance but couldn't be deported to his country in Africa because he wouldn't be able to get his meds. Yeah. Somebody who was convicted of rape but claimed to be bisexual, so successfully appealed against the deportation to Jamaica. This is all case law. And I say on Article 3, the idea is that there is a absolute right not to face ill treatment, irrespective of the risk you might be posing.
So, of course, this was a convention that was designed in the aftermath of the Second World War, telling states not to torture their own citizens. Yeah. And now it's evolved into preventing states from deporting people who are a real danger to their own citizens.
And it's expanding in extraordinary directions. Also, outside the immigration, there's the recent Switzerland ruling where basically climate change was identified as an Article 8 right. So it's growing and growing.
Who is in charge of it?
Well, there are a series of member states within the Council of Europe that are the convention signers, but ultimately the judges are making the rules.
And we don't even know who they are.
We have a British judge, and the British judge voted against, voted against the recent Swiss ruling, voted against in the 70s against the initials and moved towards...
But I'm thinking that the flight to Rwanda was blocked by a judge. We were never told which judge it was.
No, that's right. There was a particular way that judges could make rulings anonymously, which is quite extraordinary. Though even if you knew their name, there wouldn't be anything you could do about it.
No.
So there is a desperate need for reform across Europe. And I think what's interesting about the report as well is there's a perception out there in the country that this is just a problem we make because we're too scrupulous about enforcing the law here and other people just ignore it. And that really isn't true. There have been a couple of kind of high-profile cases, like in France, where they defied a ruling and deported somebody. But it's actually very rare. Most other countries are getting more asylum seekers than we are. Most of them are struggling to deport, remove even as many as we do. And there's a growing sense of new governments are coming in. Our feeling in the report is there's definitely scope for a reform coalition to come together and say the status quo, the case law we have at the moment is unacceptable, and we should work to remove it. It's going to be very difficult, and I think we have to accept that if we're going into a reform process like that, it may well be that we're going to have to leave. We have to say the status quo is not acceptable. If we can't get the reforms we want, there are various other options, including leaving completely or rebasing the constitution. But on the legal side, just very quickly, the legal side is actually most of the asylum seekers have come through legal routes. So only 28% of asylum seekers last year came through the small boats. Most of them are coming through other routes, all of which have expanded enormously. Yeah. And as you say, what the report shows is that all the incentives in the system are basically to have more and more. Within Whitehall, every other department lobbies for more. It's the Home Office sort of struggles to hold the line on this. We've got a huge lobby in the universities. We've got a very large group of NGOs with 160 people we've estimated working full-time on campaign and lobbying. We've got businesses lobbying. We've got the universities where these student visas are basically sort of keeping them afloat financially. And all these incentives have to change. And so what we recommend, area by area, an auction process will ensure that people only want to sponsor visas when it really, really matters to them. Yeah. A surety process means that people will leave when they ought to, because at the moment there are very few sanctions if they don't. Provisions to make sure that UK government aid shouldn't go to countries that are refusing to cooperate on returns, and indeed fewer visas should be given to countries that aren't cooperating on returns. I think most people would feel that common sense. Yeah. There is a provision allowing it, but it's always blocked by the other departments every time the Home Office wants to do it. And then finally, the process on what will seem controversial and maybe harsh to some is the Ascension Island proposal, where we believe, as in Australia, that the only way you're going to stop the sort of small boats is people know 100% that they're not going to be allowed to settle here. we believe actually you could put a perfectly humane reception facility on a place like Ascension Island, and from there, their claims will be judged for asylum.
Yeah.
If they're successful, we'll look to settle them in a safe third country. If they're not, we'll look to remove them. And that, although that is actually going to be far cheaper probably than the cost we're spending on hotels, which although the new government was hoping to bring that down, it's only going up.